Just letting the room fill up. That's why we're sitting in silence. Sorry. Letting the online room fill up, as it were. Yeah, we're just waiting. We're waiting for people to come. Okay, I think we'll get started. Welcome everybody to tonight's Curators Talk. My name is Christine Schmidt and I'm the Deputy Director and Head of Research here at the Wiener Holocaust Library. And I co-curated this exhibition, Holocaust Letters, with Sandra Lipner, who is a doctoral student at the Holocaust Research Institute at Royal Holloway, University of London. And we are really delighted to welcome you to tonight's talk. And we are also delighted to welcome our online audience to tonight's talk. We'll be talking about the process of curation and some of the decisions that we made and some of the letters in a bit more detail. And just before I get started, just a few words of the usual housekeeping. We aren't expecting any fire drills, so in the unlikely event that the alarm goes off, if you're here in the room, obviously, exit the library from the entry in which you came. We only have one entry and one exit, and we'll gather across the street. If you are in need of the toilets, they're accessible in the back via the lift in the basement. So you just go out this door into the back. And if you're joining us online, you'll be kept on mute throughout the entire program, but you can post any questions or comments in the chat at any time. And after our talk is through, we'll hopefully take questions from everyone here and also online. And if you are here and asking a question, if you can just wait for one of the microphones, that would be great, because otherwise people online can't hear your question. So I'm just now introducing myself, and now I'm going to talk. Usually I do one role or the other, so it's a bit funny to do both. So now I'll get started on this part. Sandra and I co-curated this exhibition as part of an initiative that we have called the Holocaust and Genocide Research Partnership, or HGRP. Which the library has established with the Holocaust Research Institute at Royal Holloway, University of London. And our exhibition was also advised by Professor Dan Stone, who very grateful for him coming tonight as well. The HGRP aims to bridge the gaps in knowledge between academic scholarship and different publics. And with our activities, we try to help people understand how research informs our understanding of the Holocaust, but also to understand how the interests and aims of different communities can and do shape research. So we're thinking of this partnership as fostering a kind of multi-directional dialogue. It's not meant as sort of scholars imparting their knowledge on everyone else. And in many ways, we think that this project, the Holocaust Letters exhibition, provided a really excellent forum for exploring this multi-directional dialogue. The exhibition focuses on letters in the library's archive that are found in our personal document collections. And these were preserved in the first instance by refugees and their descendants who had come to the UK and who eventually entrusted the library with their parents' or grandparents' collections. And these collections have, at first, of course, mainly been coming from German-speaking refugees and survivors persecuted as Jews. And over time, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a bit, the origins of these personal collections have shifted to include refugees from Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, France, and elsewhere. So we'll show some examples soon that illustrates this. And today the library receives some 70 to 80 personal document collections, with each collection ranging from a single folder to multiple archival boxes each year. And the letters make up a significant part of these personal collections. We also receive many inquiries about how to access and interpret these collections, from the kind of more straightforward, if challenging type questions about deciphering handwriting and different types of script, to translation and how to find resources to do this, to the meaning of different types of stamps and postmarks, to the less difficult ones, such as, do these letters have any actual significance, and are they important as historical documents for research? And I think I can speak for both of us when I say yes, absolutely they do. So this project is with this focus on a significant body of evidence we hold at the library, but which remains rather unexplored, was first conceived embryonically through a workshop held at the USC in California called Knowledge on the Move, in which my co-author, Dan Stone, and I analyzed letters held at the library within a kind of a migrant knowledge framework. The questions and the themes of that workshop linked perfectly with our exploration of the significance of the letters here at the library, with its history sort of rooted, if I can use that word in this context, in forced migration. We were founded by Alfred Wiener, who was a German Jewish intellectual who was forced to leave Nazi Germany, first for the Netherlands and then finally London, where he continued his efforts to collect documentation to undermine the Nazis here, even while his wife and 3 daughters remained behind and were deported. So the story of forced migration and persecution frames our archive, and thus the significance for personal documents held here. And as curators, we also recognized and built our work on a significant body of new academic work that focuses on the epistolary, including, but not only within the field of Holocaust and Jewish studies, as well as in other historical eras and from many different disciplines, including material culture and literary studies, anthropology, digital humanities, and so on. So with this exhibition, we aim to kind of build on the scholarship on letters as a source, and we consider letters as objects. This is a rather contested idea, which we'll talk a little bit about, and we think it actually holds a lot of weight, so we'll explain. The exhibition has 2 kind of main overarching themes. We explore letters as sites of knowledge production about the Holocaust as it unfolded, as well as their materiality. So how their markings, marginalia, and physical condition can help us interpret what's contained within. The exhibition is also in part inspired by the kinds of questions we're asked frequently about interpreting and safeguarding letters by those who hold them privately, and who often make the very difficult decision to donate them to the library for care, archiving, and research. The exhibition examines how letters survived, recognizing, and we hope, paying a small tribute to the individuals and families who played decisive primary roles in safeguarding them and who make the profound decision to let them go and trusting them to us. And finally, by having the exhibition here at the library, we engage a variety of audiences, from students to heritage practitioners and archivists to scholars and family members and researchers. And we want visitors to the exhibition program to consider the ways in which the library and other archives kind of further mediate the knowledge contained within letters and indeed other forms of historical evidence. So the exhibition is, of course, now on the wall, but we don't see it as a kind of static or fixed in the sense that it's framing, and we hope it will continue to frame different types of engagement with its themes, events that focus on different aspects of letter writing and study we're hosting, including discovery and preservation, translation, as well as scholarly interpretation. So if you haven't had a chance to see those events that we've already hosted, a lot of them are available on our website, so you can have a look at what we've hosted. The exhibition has had also this kind of remarkable effect of reaching people far and wide who, it seems like on a weekly basis, who are asking to donate their collections of letters or to get more information about the letters they hold. And it's obviously visiting the exhibition has given new insight into the materials that they hold. And we've witnessed within the exhibition space as a space where people can gather and discuss their own kind of embodied knowledge of discovery and share the meaning they have. And for me, that's been one of the most kind of rewarding aspects since we've launched it. So I'm going to hand over to Sandra, and she's going to say a little bit more about the process that we started with.
Thanks, Christine. I couldn't agree more that there have been many very moving moments, and it's been a real privilege to work on this exhibition as a project intern as part of my PhD under the supervision of Professor Dan Stone at Royal Holloway, University of London. In my thesis, I evaluate my own family's collection of letters from the Nazi era to investigate the experience and role of middle-class Germans in the Third Reich. And against this background, the family collections kept here in the archive of the Wiener Holocaust Library had a very familiar feel to them and contained many similar themes, emotions, cultural references, and so on. But each letter also offers unique and often very poignant insights into the writer's everyday lives and the larger worlds in which they lived. To me, this is one of the key points that we tried to capture in this exhibition, and I would be curious to hear whether you feel that we managed to do that. It reflects a recent development in writing this history, that the specific circumstances and not the typicality of someone's life are relevant for the bigger picture that we call history. To put it differently, history has moved away from this assumption that any one person can be statistically representative of any other. We're all unique. and towards an understanding that every social actor can tell telling stories, as Nicole Eustace puts it, because she or he is embedded in a matrix of relationships based on mirrored categories of identity and power that yield really important insights into how the Nazi state worked, because it was a social web. So we had adopted this idea of a social web. I just want to draw your attention to two collections that stood out for me to introduce you to some of the key letters that we worked with. One letter that really stood out for me is the one that we placed at the very beginning of the exhibition. You'll find it just behind the door where the tour around the room actually starts in a way. It was written by Siegfried Grossbart, a Jewish refugee from Vienna who eventually settled in the UK. His father died in 1931, leaving his mother to look after their 4 children by herself while also running the family business. They had a sportswear factory with retail outlets in Vienna's best shopping areas. Siggi and his 2 brothers were imprisoned in Dachau and Buchenwald in the summer of 1938. And after 8 months in the camps, the brothers were released because they could prove that they would emigrate immediately. Siggi arrived in London in February 1939, and his 2 brothers soon followed. This letter is from April 1939, and he writes to his friend Gaston Belf, another emigre in New York. It shows his thorough knowledge of the political situation based on a mixture of personal experience and the information that he gathered via the news and other sources. He wrote, "As far as I understand politics, we're on the brink of war. According to the British," this is April 1939, so the brink of war is very much something that's quite early on in people's minds. "According to the British, in 2 months at the most, everything will be clear, whether war or peace. Personally, I wish for the former. I know exactly what I'm saying, although millions of people will suffer the consequences again, perhaps myself too, but I see in the coming war the only solution to the Jewish question, and above all, and this is the most important thing, the final destruction of this regime, which I hate so much. Because believe me, I will never be happy as soon as," and that's how he puts it, "I know that someone is still languishing in these accursed concentration camps and that all the damage done by these cowardly pigs has not been avenged." Sorry. The sentence that really stands out is, "I see in the coming war the only solution to the Jewish question, and above all, and this is the most important thing, the final destruction of this regime which I hate so much." Grossbart's sentence picks up the style of Hitler's speeches and subverts the content of his infamous Reichstag speech of the 30th of January 1939 to great effect, I think. In this speech, Hitler had announced, "I want to be a prophet again today. If the international financial jury in and outside Europe should succeed in plunging the nations once more into a world war, the result will not be the Bolshevization of the earth and thus the victory of Jewry, but the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe." How poignant against this is Grossbart's observation that the coming war was the only solution to the Jewish question, and above all, and this is the most important thing, the final destruction of this regime, which I hate so much. In putting these words on paper, he combined the various bits of information he had and turned them into knowledge of what we now call the Holocaust. He wrote the letter in April 1939. His prediction was incredibly prescient and accurate, and it strikes a chord in our present day, I think, when living in proximity to an armed conflict makes it clear once again that a war of aggression can only be stopped with war. A second collection or correspondence that I would like to highlight comes from Vicky Abrams from the time when she was incarcerated in Lichtenburg concentration camp. She was born in 1900 as Hedwig Abranowitz and became Hedwig Leibetzeder, which you see on the plaque that she received in Berlin in 2016 when she got married. And that was so she changed her name when she got married in 1919. She came from an Austrian Jewish family and studied philosophy at the University of Vienna, where she completed her PhD in 1925. Until 33, she was the editor of a Berlin-based glossy magazine, Das Magazin. It's very nice to look up if you want to Google that one. It's on the Wiener Library's website as well. Her anti-Nazi activities were discovered and she was incarcerated in Jauer prison in Upper Silesia and then in Lichtenburg concentration camp in Saxony from 1936 until 1939. During her imprisonment, her husband filed for divorce on the grounds of her Jewish background. In October 1938, the Nazis stripped her of her doctorate, which was only restored to her after the war in 1947. Hedwig Leibetzeder, who later anglicized her name to Vicky Abrams, wrote about her experiences as a political prisoner both during and after her imprisonment. In March 1939, she was released from Lichtenberg, and after a brief return to Vienna, she joined her mother and two sisters who had fled to the UK and lived with them in Belsize Park in North London and in Nottingham. I want to show you two pieces from this correspondence by her. The first one is a postcard from the 11th of November 1938, and it's fascinating for the aspects of postal history and also of general history, which it makes visible. In terms of postal history, it shows the printed stationery of Lichtenberg concentration camp. Just give you that. There we are. Which inmates had to use. All stationery carried an extract of the camp's rules, and it reminded them that each prisoner in protective custody may send and receive 2 letters and 2 postcards per month. The letter content must be clear and legible. Letters must not exceed 4 pages each, 20 lines in this size. All postal communications must be furnished with the precise name of the sender, as well as their location and prisoner number. Any postal communication that does not meet these requirements will not be delivered, and so on and so forth. You can see that they really thought of pretty much everything that you can think of in connection with letters. In terms of general history, this postcard was sent in the immediate aftermath of the November pogroms that the Nazis called Kristallnacht. It shows, let me just see if I'm going forwards or backwards to show you that. On your right-hand side, you can see the repercussions of the murder of Ernst vom Rath in Paris for the Jewish inmates of concentration camps. All Jewish inmates had to copy out this text, and we know this because Vicky Abrams put it in quotation marks, and the text says, as a result of the murder in Paris by a Jew, a ban on packages and letters has been imposed for Jewish prisoners for a certain period of time. The rescindment of these measures will be made known later. Inquiries to the camp authorities are pointless and are therefore to be refrained from. So, as I said, we know that she had to copy this out because she put quotation marks around the statement, and then she put her doctorate in the signature, which is quite a nice little touch from somebody who had been stripped of that, and who was writing to her family, therefore didn't really need to tell them her title. A letter from her from 2 months earlier in September 1938 shows the full extent of the measures to which the censors would go. You can see the cutout areas of her letter where the censor really disagreed with what she was saying. You can also see with the red pencil marks what the censor wanted the family to know, what they shouldn't know. So it's a double message there. She writes, my dearest ones, here for a week now, no word from you since Yawa, very fearful for you. I hope you're all right and in good spirits. How differently everything has turned out than we expected. Carry out your plans regardless of me. With the uncertainty of when I will get out, it would be foolish to take me into account. If only we all stay healthy, everything will somehow turn out all right. And she carries on to kind of talk about how her life has stopped, whereas theirs continues. She says, to be clearly defined and be oneself is the only certain thing in my life. You can see the philosophy training there. Otherwise, I feel as naked as a newborn baby. I love that. It's a very vulnerable kind of description of her feeling in incarceration. And then she says, I'm allowed to receive 1 parcel. Remember that in the camp rules, it said no parcels allowed. And then she had also been treated as a Jewish prisoner. They got banned from parcels a lot. So she gets to receive 1 parcel, and then she goes into this really lengthy list of what she needs, and it's clothes and toiletries and medication for all sorts of ailments like hemorrhoids and all sorts of things that tell us a little bit about what that daily life must have been like. So just to give you an idea, my blue tracksuit, wind cheater, black wool dress, 2-piece polo shirt or shabby jumper, 2 pairs of knickers as warm as possible, 1 easily washed shirt, 2 bras, size 42 in really strong fabric, 2 pajamas, maybe the old warm ones of Hilda's, in any case, nothing new. The shabbiest and oldest things are good enough for here, and so on and so forth. And then she goes into books. So plus French dictionary. The following is then censored, where she asks for a world atlas, not allowed to think internationally or kind of come up with conspiracies, I guess, I don't know. The 2 books the lawyer was unable to give me, so this is the divorce going on. The lawyer is trying to inform her and get her into a position where she can actually cope with the divorce proceedings. And then also censored another 1 or 2 from your library. Best would be something historical, food for thought and instruction. So she's not allowed food for thought and instruction. She says, you have to provide your own reading matter here. I've also found a few women to play chess with. She also complains about Jehovah's Witnesses really getting on her nerves. So the few women that she has found to play chess with are good news. Otherwise, you learn with time to focus your concentration away from the external surroundings to the extent that I believe I'm capable of standing in the middle of Broadway and reading Schopenhauer quite calmly. I think she's quite incredible. The little flower in the Berlin clothes parcel gave me pleasure. And then she says something that comes up again and again in these letters. If only I just had post. Good that we can write regularly. I can only console you with the fact that I am being and will be brave. If only I knew the same about you too. And then she sends them her love and hugs and kisses. I was really moved by the glimpses of camp life that we get here via this list of items. Which Vicky requests, that the clothes needed to be made of really strong fabric, that the shabbiest and oldest things are good enough for here. And then also the psychological and emotional repercussions, which she describes. She describes an indifference to everything incidental. She describes a sense of vulnerability, naked as a newborn baby. Her clinging on to the sense of self and her knowledge that she's able to endure hunger and despair and everything imaginable if only she can be with the people she loves and values. The impossibility of this leads her into depression. And she says this, she names depression as something that she encounters every day. Sigi Grossbart's and Vicky Abrams' letters were both from the pre-war period, both were originally from Vienna, both ended up fleeing to London. So in many ways, they're representative of the collections of the Wiener Holocaust Library, which we'll say a little bit more about later on. Christine Schmidt will now show you a third set of letters that's different in all respects.
So, right. So as I mentioned at the opening, the library's collections were first shaped, and as Sandra has just mentioned, in the main by German-speaking Jewish refugees. But our collections have become, much broader and have come to include collections related to the Holocaust in other geographies. And we do, of course, also hold letters from the wartime period, written in extremis in the most desperate of situations. And this one was written just prior to deportation. So time and place are therefore really important contexts for understanding each of the letters. And one of the key letters for me was this one. This is an emotional last message written by Maria and Maximilian Wortmann, who were writing from within the Warsaw Ghetto. They were selected for deportation to Treblinka on the 12th of September, 1942. And while they were standing on the Umschlagplatz, which is what the railway siding was called from where the trains deported, the couple wrote this coded message and plea to a distant cousin named Ludwig in the hopes that they might be saved and that the letter would reach their daughter Zunia, from whom they had become separated within the ghetto. So Maria writes to her daughter about supplies with the hope that she might live on a bit longer, and tells her where the quote unquote butter or money is hidden. So another aspect of this letter that's really interesting, and you can't necessarily see it from the digital copy. So apologize to those of you online, but hopefully you might get to see the exhibition in person. This letter is on show in the back case, in one of the first few cases on the left. It's a very tiny, it's very small in size, and the length of the letter is noteworthy. The fragility of the letter the paper on which it was written, the use of all the space, and the reuse of paper that you can see it's been written on the back of a list to convey vital knowledge as the last seconds before their deportation. So as I said, you can see this in the back case. And it doesn't quite capture it here in the digital version, but with the help of our designers, we've been able to display both sides of this letter to demonstrate the kind of physical urgency of this message in the way it was written. And the letter reads, Ludwig, we have waited all day yesterday next to the gate where you've seen young Ritter. I and Maria are on the official Judenrat list and have with us the official numbers. We found ourselves here accidentally. And then he's of course pleading, Ludwig, please do what you can. And then the note from the mother is, Dear Junius, obviously this is our fate. Be brave and cope. Collect everything from Halber and sell gradually. And here you can see where she says, collect everything, butter is in the wardrobe. So interestingly, thanks to the donor of this collection, Sir Mike Stratton, who was a family friend of Junia's, who did in fact survive, we know a bit more about the afterlife of this letter. It did obviously reach Ludwig, its intended recipient, and he brought it to Dunia in the ghetto. And here's her interpretation from her unpublished memoir, which we also have in our collection. Dunia wrote, "My parents were trying to tell him that they had money, that maybe he could do something to get them out of the train. You see, my father writes here that they are on the official list and that they have a number. If you had a number, you thought that you were safe at the time and that you could do something. That's my mother's writing." So obviously she's now referring to the second part of the letter. "When you look at these letters, from those few words, you can see that my mother was the stronger one. The way she writes, her hope always was for me. She tells me to be brave and tells me certain things." And this actually is a very moving letter for me. She tells me she says where the money is. She calls it maswa, or butter in English. She comes up much stronger. Sorry, we're not supposed to do this as historians, but we do it sometimes. But in real life, she was the quieter one of the two. My father was very boisterous, but out of this comes her courage. She was stronger. She knew what was going to happen because she tells me to be brave. So the unpublished memoir actually goes on to say what happened to Ludwig, who received the letter, who of course, quote, thought he was safe. And when he learned later that his wife and daughter were also taken to the Umschlagplatz, he tried to intervene on their behalf, and he was told that he could see them, and then he was selected for deportation too. So in this case, the letter writers and the courier were murdered in Treblinka, and this is a final material connection to their experience in the ghetto. And the letters form part of the Wortmann's family collection, which was donated to the library after her death in 2015. She was actually unable to part with these letters during her lifetime. And as the donor recalled, quote, "She always kept these letters on her person. They were the soul and spirit of her parents." So understanding the deeply personal nature of these letters and what they mean physically to those who have held them and donated them is one of the, of course, drivers of this exhibition. So with that said, we would like to say just a few words about the kind of curation and the ethics and practice of curating these personal document collections. And when we first started talking about this exhibition, the topic of the exhibition, we started to tell people it's moved a lot of people and excited many visitors to the exhibition have expressed their appreciation for its personal and even intimate nature as a result of showcasing people's private letters. And of course, this has two sides to it. Even sort of reading that letter out, it's quite difficult because you're reading something that was not meant to be public. On the one hand, these letters from the past are rich sources of subjective experience and provide detailed evidence of how people made sense of the events unfolding around them. They're perfectly suited to answering questions about history of knowledge that guided us in curating the exhibition. And they were, of course, donated to the library to be read by researchers and curators and very much deserve to be placed at the center of an exhibition like this. But on the other hand, we're not their intended audience. The correspondents wrote to a private audience of relatives and friends and not to us. We can't ask their permission to read the letters, let alone publish them. But we can, however, assume that they and their descendants had a wider audience in mind when they kept and donated their letters. And we act to give a voice to these. This perspective naturally comes with a duty of care towards the letter writers and their recipients, and we wanted to bring you the highlights of our collections and chose passages and quotes that stood out because they were particularly moving, and sometimes even because they were funny. You'll probably find some of that if you look closely in the exhibition, perhaps a bit surprising. We think it's important to use the names of the writers against the context of the Holocaust, which was an orchestrated attempt to rob people of their names, identities, and lives. However, we wanted to protect their right to privacy, even as we worked within their private spheres. Our focus on knowledge production was one way we put this into practice. In curating the exhibition, we looked for comments about the general situation or for links between personal and public events. We did not look for or present individual life stories as such. That might be also something surprising about this exhibition, even though the exhibition, of course, touches on many of them. And they too are an important context for understanding the letters. So we hope we'd be interested to hear your thoughts to see if we manage the right balance between personalization and depersonalization in the exhibition. And although we agreed that these letters in some ways are really hopeful, in that they look to a future of being received and read. They were, of course, not meant to be read or displayed on a wall for thousands of visitors. And we thought about how to sensitively and ethically display them. And in the process of exploring common themes in the letters, we also note that these letters only express part of the writer's experience of the Holocaust as it unfolded. We also wanted to give space to other kinds of knowledge that have been produced by the letters and which is accessible only through a personal connection to them. And this was in part reached by working closely with a small group of collections donors, which both acknowledge this kind of custodial shift in the letters and the custodial history of the letters and their own afterlives, and also explores the kind of multi-generational dialogue descendants have had in discovering, translating, and researching their families' letters and histories. In so doing, these families have produced further Holocaust knowledge, incorporating their own private familial memory work and family-embedded interpretations with their research. So there are many aspects of these letters that we, the curators, would not have known or understood without speaking to collections donors over many months, which culminated in a kind of a small collection of oral histories that accompany the exhibition. And you can hear in the case in the very back some excerpts from these, and they're also on our YouTube channel too, so for those of you who are online. They've also reinforced the importance of looking really closely at the physical nature of these letters. And one example, one donor, Grant Rechnick, whose collection is featured here, he described how his father had held his parents' letters. They did not survive deportation, and the edges of the letters became so well worn. And you can kind of see these in the representations here. So I think, you know, this sort of challenges us to access and read these letters through a kind of this like sort of nebulous cloud of interpretation, so many different ways of looking at them. But we also think there's really no other way. And for us, it was important to give space to these kinds of interpretations. So this section was curated by the donor collections here in the exhibition. So as the world's oldest archive on the Holocaust and the Nazi era, the library has received, as I mentioned, letter donations across 7 decades. Among the most remarkable of the library's early research projects was the collection of eyewitness accounts of the Holocaust organized by the survivor community here in London. And this collection, the project ran officially until the mid-1960s and ended up collecting over 1,200 individual accounts and thousands of pages of direct testimony. And the overwhelming majority of these early accounts and donations of family correspondence until approximately about 2000 maybe, but don't hold me to that date, reflect the experiences of middle-class German and Austrian refugees whom the Nazis persecuted as Jews. They illustrate a range of political and religious positions while being fairly similar in terms of the nationality and class of their authors. And this early collection of testimonies, we have one example of that here in the exhibition because it's one of the kind of the earliest examples. Amongst testimonies, they considered letters as an early form of testimony. This kind of change can be seen in some more recent collections that have been donated. This philatelic collection of William Kaczynski, which we acquired recently, contains postal evidence of internment and incarceration from before, during, and after the Second World War, and covers a wide range of nationalities and languages, including letters in Yiddish and Hebrew. We recently displayed it in our reading room. That has been changed, that exhibition, but this collection will very soon be available for research. And another recent collection, which I just mentioned, was features in the main exhibition, is the Rechnick collection, which the family donated to the library in 2022. And this was facilitated by the Rechnick's cousin, the author Michael Rosen. It's a collection of postcards sent by Stella and Bernard Rechnick from their home in Dąbrowa in Poland to their only son, Michael, as he was later known, after his deportation to the east by the Soviets. Michael went on to fight for the Polish Armed Forces in the West and received the Bronze Medal of Merit for his service. He settled in the UK in 1946, and his parents, Stella and Bernard, and 5 of his mother's 7 siblings and their families were all killed in the Holocaust. The postcards illustrate the importance of post for displaced and separated families as the only means of staying in touch and caring for each other. So I'm going to hand over to Sandra to talk a little bit more about this process of curating with families, alongside families in this exhibition.
Thank you. So yeah, we worked with 3 families. The Reichnicks were one of them. Their distant cousin Michael Rosen took part in the whole oral history project as well, and really encouraged Grant and Barry to become the spokespeople for their family. We worked with 2 other families as well, whose collections we used, and invited them to create their own panel, which you see here. And you'll notice some interesting similarities between the 3 sections that you've got on the panel, and some interesting differences with the rest of the exhibition. And I think the one that really stands out, even from wherever you're sitting, and if you're not reading the text, is the photographs in this panel that we chose not to include in the other panels. For the 3 donor families, photographs were really important, as was a focus on what happened to their family members. So to personal stories, really, going back to what Christine said, and thinking beyond family to others before, during, and after the Holocaust. And they then presented their family histories as conveying messages. It was really clear that each one of these families had something to say to the world. So their family history had carried a meaning that they wanted to convey to us via the donation of their collection, and were then pleased to put on a wall. To give you a flavor, Michael Rosen writes, and you've got it here on the slide, "It feels like a family saga that's very personal and powerful to us, but also one that happened to millions of others. That's the hardest to grasp. We look at the terrible numbers and figures, and then their 2 parents in despair over what was happening to their only child, with the added tragic irony of hindsight that it was them who perished and not the child." Thank you. And then you may have noticed the picture that we used at the very beginning of the slideshow, and that's also on the windows and on the poster outside. That's from the Jaffe family, and Deborah Jaffe concludes her section with this message: "The letters convey the harrowing story of a young man trying to escape, to get anywhere, work, have a future, and learn English. There are false hopes, freedoms taken away, and concern for family. Sometimes where the censor may be feared, the language becomes coded and the real meaning hidden. Importantly, there's the discovery of letters by the missing, that is, those relations and friends who did not survive and who I've never heard mention of until reading of them here. This was a close-knit, extended family." And the 3rd family that we worked with was Big Eckstein's family, who discovered his father's letters during a COVID clear-out. So all these discoveries are very, very recent, and that's why the exhibition comes now in the 2020s, when you think that the Holocaust is now almost 80 years ago. It's still very, very present and current in many families. He writes, "I'm personally amazed at the strength of character and determination his father Arnost, showed to rebuild his life despite all the heartache and sadness he endured. Yet there was never any evidence of any significant hatred towards the German people, either in the letters or throughout the remainder of his life." And he then talks about how important he feels that this opportunity to share these intimate and revealing letters is for others to understand about a life destroyed by war and the rebuild that took place. I found these 3 statements really powerful because they're so personal. And as curators, we wanted to give space and recognition to this very deeply personal side of this history. And I think that's what moved us both so much a lot of the times that we worked on this. As Thomas Cahoot says, and this is thanks to Professor Dan Stone for showing me his work, history flows through us, and I think that captures it really well. The panel, which the donors co-curated, shows this by linking the generation of those who experienced the traumatic events of the Holocaust with the reflections of their descendants. And by retracing their ancestors' lives and piecing together their stories, they're again producers of Holocaust knowledge. And again, this knowledge is emotional, it's personal, it's raw, and again, it leads to action. So the circle kind of doesn't close, but it continues. It kind of spirals us forwards.
And so, as you can imagine, and as Sandra suggested, for us as curators working with the donors on their panel and their oral histories has been really fascinating, and we hope that they have felt the same. And we further hope that this exhibition helps them with their ongoing family history searches, and that their willingness to share and donate these deeply private and precious Holocaust letters will encourage many others to do the same. And it seems to be working. And there are many more research questions we think that these kinds of letters can answer. And this is just sort of scratching the surface really in this exhibition. And we hope the exhibition gives you an idea the treasure trove that these letters are. So with that, I think we'll end, and happy to take any questions or comments now. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. I wanted to know, the question about the photographs is really interesting, because the one family of survivor that I'm working with are also very, very keen that her image is always shown. And I wondered whether, when you get donations, do they want to give you a photograph of the person with the letters as well?
I mean, our photo archivist is standing in the hallway now, so I could pull him in, but I won't do that. There he is. Yes, I think the answer is yes. We do get a lot of photographs along with the personal document collections. And what's great is that our senior archivist, Howard, who I think is probably still upstairs at the moment, takes an oral history with donors as he acquires the collection, and then they talk about the photographs. And that's actually how I found out a lot about this letter from the Wortmann family, because he had a really nice conversation with the donor. And then there was this unpublished memoir, but it also included images, which I didn't show, sort of in the spirit of the rest of the exhibition, because what we're trying to do is really bring the letters to the fore. And we have a different approach to them, but as you can see, it's not so separated sometimes. And of course, families have a very different way of reading the letters than we do sometimes. So that was the kind of signification of not using the photographs. Did you want to add anything to that? We have them. We just didn't use them.
I think the letters in the foreground is very much what I was thinking, but also this focus on knowledge production, even though that's a very academic matter and perhaps ambitious for public exhibition, but I think it really worked, and I hope you agree, because it brings out by just really going through the letters, and as Christine said, in this balancing act between between personalizing these histories and depersonalizing the letters. I think what comes out is this vast amount of knowledge. So the attention that we wanted to draw your attention to the amount of knowledge that was there during the events that then became known as the Holocaust. And I think we were also really aware of of working in people's private spheres. So it was a way of being really respectful. And it's different if that's your family collection and you can choose a picture and it has meaning and you put it there. That's a different kind of thing, I think.
Okay, we have a question here from Margot Kelman, kind of a practical question for the library. She asks, how does one go about donating letters? She has a collection from the Holocaust and post-war. Do you review them first before accepting?
Yes, that's great. And that's exactly what we are hoping this exhibition does. So thank you for that question. You would be making an appointment with our archivist, and he would go through them with you to make sure that it's something that fits within our collections remit and make sure that there's no sort of obvious damage or mold or things like that. But he can also advise you on how to order them and to store them properly and things like that, and to help you kind of interpret what's going on. But yes, we do assess them first and then discuss the donation with you. So happy to put you in touch with him after the talk. If maybe Martina, if you can drop Howard's email in the chat. Thank you.
I am puzzled as a Polish woman living here, well, 45 years. I am puzzled. How did you come up with Nietzsche on this photograph? It really worries me because it's written in such a beautiful, beautiful Polish. What is Jewish person in such a destructive, worrying circumstances thinking? I mean, Nietzsche does not fit.
No, you're right. Absolutely, it's not Nietzsche.
I'm going to confess that that's my fault because I looked at it and I thought, oh, there's Nietzsche, and and I know it's not Nietzsche. I know it's Pilsudski, but
They look very similar.
They do look very similar, and I just want to say it's not the curator's fault. It's my fault. So that's I appreciate what you said.
Thank you for that comment. And we did actually add this to, there's a QR code in the exhibition that shows you all the different types of sources that we used. We didn't cite that it was this mistake specifically, but we did correct it in the errata of the exhibition. But it is, they have a similar sort of, I mean, that sort of hairstyle, I guess, was popular at that time, but, obviously it was Pilsudski.
Also, I did like that in the text, it does say that the photographer, who was a friend, make 16 copies of it, and she paid, because it was a friend, only so little. And my interpretation, knowing nothing, but I was thinking that she was making money, trying to sell it, and Piłsudski would be popular, and that was, to make money to survive.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Any other questions? Anything else online? Oh, there's two in the back. Okay. Thanks.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having this. I just learned about this place today. So when I hopped in, and I heard there was a talk, I was like, this is perfect. So I had two questions. One was a bit more technical. When you were working with the families, the three families, and doing the oral histories and the interpretation of the letters, have you ever had any disagreements, or especially on what should be shown and what should be explained? And my second question is, do you know of any other places that have ever done an exhibition like this, showing the letters of the Jews during the Second World War? Well, before and after and during, of course. Thank you.
Sandra, do you want to take the first one and then I can take the second, or? Go ahead.
So yes, the disagreements, I think that's a very important part of working with family collections. I think also in terms of the question about donating a family collection, families tend to have not just one member, but many members, and agreeing on what the best way forward with old dusty objects, as they're called in my family, is not always easy. So speaking from experience, the answer is, yeah, there's always disagreement. Did we witness anything in terms of working with the donors? Yes, we had to actually become part of censorship ourselves. So there was there were names that needed to be not shared. So you will find somewhere in the exhibition over there, you'll find a black strip over a name that's not a Nazi censor. That's actually the donor who said she didn't feel comfortable sharing that name for family reasons. So yeah.
And then with regard to your second question, one of the things that we did when we were starting to curate the exhibition was to look at how letters were used and displayed in other Holocaust-related exhibitions. And you do find them. The new exhibition at the Imperial War Museum uses them to great effect because the whole exhibition uses documents and photographs and evidence that was created at the time, and not sort of looking, using testimonies to recreate events. So letters are a key source, as we've shown here. But there has been some exhibitions that look at last letters. So Yad Vashem has a fantastic online exhibition called Last Letters, I think it's called. But there wasn't one that we could find now that this will go online, maybe it will be corrected, that looked at letters as a source, as a site of knowledge production, and how you can understand what people knew, and letters as a source in this way. So we didn't look at only the last letters. Of course, that was part of the exhibition, but it wasn't the only kind of focus. So we wanted to kind of get beyond that usual sort of treatment of the letters, and the kind of always grabbing for, it seems like there's a tendency to grab for that type of a letter in exhibitions, the kind of last letter before deportation, even though that is obviously very moving. But thanks for that. Do you have a question?
My question was really exactly the same as the second question here, but I can take the opportunity perhaps to thank you for a wonderful exhibition. I was just interested in, yes, comparable collections elsewhere in the world and the relationship between the Wiener and other institutions. Perhaps that slightly bursts the bounds also of this presentation.
No, we obviously are one of the many collections of Holocaust era evidence, the largest one in the UK, but there are many other institutions in the UK that hold them. And of course, in the largest ones outside of the UK would be at Yad Vashem and the US Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington. And we have good relationships with other partner institutions. And we actually, I mean, I would say like 99% of the letters in this exhibition come from our collections. One has been loaned, and we were actually chatting a little bit about this before the exhibition. The whole kind of point of the exhibition, one of the points of the exhibition was to showcase the library as a safe space for personal document collections. And sometimes we just didn't have examples of things. So for example, we had one collection loaned that had documents from, I think it's Dachau, in the front case. But now since the exhibition launched, we now have those kinds of letters as well. We had reproductions before. And we had also an example of, we don't actually have examples of the Briefaktion. This, I'm looking at Jennifer here, who is an expert on this, history. In the last case over there, or the last panel over there, and the example of where the Nazis sort of weaponized the post to provide this idea that people were alive and well, and you can find those letters using the postmarks, and we didn't have any of those in our collection, so we used the digital copy from the Holocaust Museum in Washington because they have an example of basically everything. So yeah, we are one of many repositories. So I guess also the message is, yes, we are a safe place, but we aren't the only one, and as long as the letters get to one of these, that would be, we think, the best place for them in one of these repositories. Any other questions? Okay. Martina, is there anything else in line? We'll close.
I'm trying to see if they can chat.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
I read a British Army magazine of 1945 talking about the liberation of Bergen-Belsen, which is something I've done a little bit of research on. And it said that they wanted to encourage the survivors to write letters, even if they didn't know if somebody was alive, because it was a way of reaching out and making contact with the world. And I wondered whether you'd come across anything sort of similar, the idea of just writing as a exercise, almost a sort of enterprise in itself for its own sake, to feel connected.
Not sure. I know
I haven't come across anything that didn't have an addressee, but I've come across a lot of letters that had a wider audience in mind. So where people are writing to one specified person, and then there are two options. Either that family then passes it from person to person, and often people, it's like a round robin, people add messages, and then it gets sent from the Netherlands to Portugal, to the UK, to the US, and then back to the sender. And sort of becomes richer in meaning as it kind of acquires more messages, or they write to a specific person and they have posterity in mind. So they actually say in the text, this is important, keep this. And that gave me license in a way to work in these collections and think there is no ethical barrier that's too big to overcome.
It's interesting what you say about the kind of recuperative impact of writing. That's maybe a gap, obviously, in the exhibition, but it's an interesting one. And there's new work also being done on by a woman named scholar named Jan Lamberts, who looked at the role of letter writing in search for the missing. It's really interesting what she's done in terms of understanding what you can learn from those types of letters, which maybe look sort of the same. I'm looking for so-and-so and so-and-so, but actually have a lot of information about what happened. So her work is really interesting in that regard too.
We have one question from Alison asking, do you have letters received by children who had come to the UK with the kinder transport? How did their letters compare?
The exhibition actually showcases a lot of children's letters, or we made sure that we covered a lot of a range of age groups, and I made sure that we pulled out some of the examples from children. How do they compare? They're very much focused on describing their new daily lives. So they give really vivid descriptions. In the case that I'm thinking of life in London, there's a description of women carry a garden on their hats. And her foster parents, the lady was very fond of beer, she writes, so that struck her as unusual. And those are the funny instances that Christine alluded to earlier on that you might find as you walk around. They're very, very moving because the parent letters that go to the foster families are full of worry and concern, and sometimes contain parenting from abroad. So it's very interesting how your parental duties don't stop, and you don't stop having that 2-track or 3-track or however many tracks in your mind of kind of thinking of that little person that belongs to you, even if they move countries and they're so far away, you can't even imagine what their daily lives look like. So there's advice to the foster parents, a strong advice to the children to behave themselves, be good, be good, be good, and that kind of thing.
Then another one asking another question. What, if any, say does the family retain over how their letters and documents are used and who by? Is this negotiable?
That's a good question. Yeah, I should bring Howard down. But we do have a donor agreement that comes with that is discussed at the point of donation, and it can be specified that certain things might be embargoed for a certain period of time, or that they shouldn't appear online. That's a sort of relatively recent development because sometimes we're putting things online that it's a technology that didn't exist when some of the collections were donated, obviously. So we have a takedown policy. So we do a lot of research before we put things online to ensure that there isn't a next of kin available that we could ask before we do those sorts of things. But it is all embedded in the donor agreement, and it sort of takes care of all kinds of scenarios, but it's definitely something that's discussed with our archivist at the point of donation. Okay. I think if there are no other questions, unfortunately, we don't have this for you online, but there is a little bit of wine and nibbles in the back. But this is just to say thank you for coming and for listening. And thank you, of course, also online for coming and for all of your questions and for visiting the exhibition, and happy to chat further over a drink. Thank you again.